This is the 8th in our series on George Grant, the owl, and JADIS. The owl, of course, being the symbol of wisdom and insight at both a theoretical or philosophical, theological, spiritual level, and then also at a practical, applied lifestyle level, so bringing together both theoria in the Greek sense and praxis. And JADIS, which is the dynamo of the West with its hyper-driven rationalism, its scientism, its inability to slow down and think deeply about the human soul and society. And so the West largely is a victim of our own drivenness. We're addicted to, we're almost in high octane fuel, so most people just do not know how to slow down and be still. A few weeks ago I did a rebuttal of sorts to Keller and Piper, who in an interview suggested that George MacDonald was not a Christian, and he certainly didn't write as a Christian writer. But they had, previous to that, done a very laudatory series on C.S. Lewis, as if somehow C.S. Lewis was an authentic Christian, and George MacDonald not only was questionable as a Christian, but perhaps was even not so. The fact is that C.S. Lewis held George MacDonald at the very highest regards as his master, so I think it can be legitimately suggested that probably Piper and Keller and people of that neo-Calvinist ilk do not even understand C.S. Lewis. Interesting to note that George MacDonald came out of a Calvinist, a Scottish Calvinist background throughout his life. Early years, he was immersed in it, he saw through it, and he moved beyond it. So one of the reasons I suspect those like Keller and Piper are suspicious of MacDonald is he undermines the very Calvinism they see that it makes for authentic Christianity. Now, C.S. Lewis, not being a Calvinist in no sense of the word, could have a real affection and respect for George MacDonald. Interesting also someone like J.I. Packer, who's an elder in many ways of the neo-Calvinist clan, had his doubts about C.S. Lewis, particularly his view of the atonement, and Lewis certainly didn't hold to a penal theory of the atonement in any way, and you certainly don't see that played out in the Chronicles of Narnia or any other of his works. But what I'd like to do just for a couple of minutes here, C.S. Lewis put together the George MacDonald an anthology with a lovely introduction by Lewis. And in this there's some lovely quotes by Lewis in regards to MacDonald, which really clarify his indebtedness to MacDonald and why he would never go down the Calvinist route himself. And in this introduction Lewis even mentions Calvinism, MacDonald's Calvinism, and his movement away from it. Let me start with one quote by Lewis. "I have never concealed the fact that I regarded him, i.e. MacDonald, as my master. Indeed, I fancy I have never written a book in which I did not quote from him. But it has not seemed to me that those who have received my books," and this could be applied quite aptly to Keller and Piper, "it has not seemed to me that those who have received my books kindly take even now sufficient notice of the affiliation. In fact, in them they separated the affiliation, but for Lewis, in fact, it was a very close affiliation. Honesty drives me to emphasize it, and even if honesty did not, well, I am a Don, and source hunting is perhaps in my marrow." So you'd think people like the neo-Calvinists would do some authentic source hunting via C.S. Lewis and his affinities with MacDonald. Much of the anthology comes from George MacDonald's unspoken sermons, which certainly are contra-Calvinist, have hints of universalism, obviously oppose penal theory, the atonement, and election, and double election. Sovereignty is understood in a certain sense. Here's Lewis once again. "Most of my extracts in this anthology are taken from the 3 volumes of unspoken sermons. My own debt to this book is almost as great as one can owe to another, that is, the unspoken sermons. Nearly all serious inquiries to whom I have introduced it acknowledge that it has given them great help, sometimes indispensable help, towards the very acceptance of the Christian faith." And once more, which is really the clincher in terms of Lewis MacDonald, "I know hardly any other writer who seems to be closer or more continually close to the Spirit of Christ himself." So here you have the link. I could also add, next to the anthology is obviously The Great Divorce, were significant elements of the Great Divorce. Lewis is in constant conversation with George MacDonald on the gray zone, and then the journey from the gray zone to the world of abiding light. And so the MacDonald-Lewis, they were so friends, you can't separate them. And those who would try and separate MacDonald because he broke from Calvinism and support Lewis certainly don't understand Lewis, and they certainly are bereft of a very important writer in Christian fantasy, Christian sermons, and to a lesser degree, Christian novels. I might also add MacDonald was a great lecturer in English literary theory, and some of the works he did around the world on English literature are outstanding, and these yet need to be put into print. And someone like Barbara Mallet Wingfield in Portland is doing great work on this, and her newest edition on F.D. Morris and George MacDonald will bring this to the fore, and it'll be in the summer edition of 215 Wingfold. So George MacDonald, C.S. Lewis, soul friends, certainly contra Calvinism.